This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
Thanks. Thank you all very much for your attendance. There's one or two, well, are there one or two chairs at the front? There aren't. There almost was. So you can take a seat wherever you can find one, and please do so, so that we can get proceedings underway. I'm Alex White, Director General here at the Institute. I just simply want to say how thrilled we are to be hosting this event, and I've already had a chance to welcome our distinguished visitors and their colleagues, and really, really happy to host you and look forward to the discussion. And my only other task is to hand over to, once she has her microphone fixed, to my colleague, IIEA board member, Dr. Orla Quinn, who's going to chair and moderate the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex. I'll stand for the first bit, if that's okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to be here. As Alex said, my name is Dr. Orla Quinn, and I have the pleasure of chairing today's session and really looking forward to it. For those of you who haven't met before, I'm on the board here at the IIEA, and previously I was Secretary General of the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment. And I just said earlier in my career, when I worked with the European Commission, I covered structural funds and the peace programme in Northern Ireland. So this is a topic, I have to say, that's of huge interest to me personally, and obviously to you here in this room, and a particular warm welcome to those of you online. So today's event is on the present phase of constitutional discussion on these islands, specifically on the work of Professor Pete Shirlow and Lee Reynolds, and I'll introduce them shortly. But most of all, it's about defending democracy. It's about providing a platform, which this institute does so well, for discussions across so many topics. And today's is of particular importance. And both Pete and Lee, in particular, will draw on evidence, research in making their case. And I'm a great believer, and always have been, in the benefit of information based on evidence and research. And so for us here in the Institute, it's a particularly great occasion to welcome both Pete and Lee. Now, I have to do a few housekeeping points just before we start for those of us here. Again, just to say that Pete and Lee will speak for about 35-40 minutes. We'll then move to Q&A, which I will hopefully moderate well for you all. And we'll have questions both from our online audience and those of you here in the room. Can I ask those of you who do wish to ask questions that you introduce yourself and your organisation, and I think that helps us all. So, without further ado, I'll give a very brief introduction to our two speakers today. So, Professor Pete Shirlow is Director of the Institute of Irish Studies at the University of Liverpool. He's a leading expert on conflict, segregation, and post-conflict transformation. His public policy work includes chairing the OFMDFM, the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister group, which works with recruiting people with conflict-related convictions, and he also sits on the board of the mental health charity Threshold. Then turning to Lee Reynolds. Lee was the former Special Advisor to First Minister Arlene Foster, and he previously served also as the DUP's Director of Policy. He directed the Vote Leave campaign in Northern Ireland in 2016, and he's recognised for his strategic insight into shifting voter identities and the future of unionism. Congratulations, he will shortly assume a new role as Commissioner for the Ulster Scots and Ulster British tradition, appointed alongside Dr. Katie Radford, Director of the OICE, and Paul Deeds, Irish Language Commissioner by the First Minister and Deputy First Minister. So we are very honoured indeed to have Lee here, because I think this might be one of your last final engagements, Lee.
My last talking in public about politics for
5 years.
Wow, right. Well, what a great for us to get the benefit of your wisdom. So we're delighted again to have you. So without further ado, I will hand over, and I think Pete, you're speaking first.
No, it's me.
Oh, Lee.
Yep.
Lee.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us on this rather dreich day in Dublin. There used to be an old slogan that appeared on walls, which always said we would never surrender the blue skies of Ulster for the grey skies of the Irish Republic. And I swear to God, the sun was shining when I got in the car this morning. Okay. Now, on the road for the union. Hold on, technology's let me down to begin with.
Before I was talking back, and I just said, because I forgot to mention earlier, that this session is on the record. So just to be aware of that, it's not gone.
Oh, right, I'm going to, wrong, yes. Yes, okay. It'll be in 3 parts. I will take you through our future place tour, what it's been about, 4 numbers in a photograph, and then polling analysis. Our future place in the United Kingdom tour began with 4 community workers in North and West Belfast who wanted to put together a positive pro-UK, pro-Northern Ireland, pro-union event. And they approached myself and Pete, the gruesome twosome, to start delivering those talks. We had a small event as the start, but it was decided to carry on. It is entirely grassroots and organic. Nobody's paying for it. It's all delivered by volunteers. Local groups invite us along and act as hosts and local promoters. So far, we've had 18 events. We've had 25 in the room. We've had 210 in the room and everything in between. And it works out about roughly an average of about 100 at each meeting. So we've had about 1,800 people. There we go. What do we say in these things? Well, there's 2 parts. I offer a statistical analysis, which I will share with you later. I offer an assessment of unionism and Irish separatism. From that, we draw a range of strategic recommendations and then offer 21 rules. What are the 21 rules about? It's essentially trying to get all the different parts who are pro-UK and pro-Northern Ireland to be the best they can be and to coordinate and collaborate to be the best they can be collectively. Then part 2, Pete focuses more on how the demographic change, how it has not proven to be destiny, and offering the untold positive story. Right. 5 numbers and a photograph. I'm one of a small band. I've actually ran a referendum campaign in Northern Ireland. And what it did teach me, or certainly massively instilled in me, is the importance of sub-data. The headlines of a poll are nice, but if you dig deep, the diamonds are in the sub-data. And that was very much the lesson for me. When I took the job, or was offered the job to run the Leave campaign in Northern Ireland, the polling said 70-30. Northern Ireland was predicted to be the most pro-EU part of the United Kingdom. By election day, it proved to have seen the largest swing from Remain to Leave in any part of the United Kingdom. It ended up 56-44. Now, why did I take the job? Everybody thought I was on a complete hiding to nothing, and it was just madly taking a ram dash at something again. The polling that we conducted, Vote Leave conducted, asked a question with 100 words. Remain was explained in 100 words and Leave was explained in 100 words. And it asked the question, which do you agree with? Well, the result was 51% for Remain, 49% Leave. That proved to me that my 30% was solid and the 70% was soft. And it told me which groups were soft. It told me which people could speak to them and get them to move position. So we designed and delivered a campaign over 6 weeks, which did just that. That's how we got from 30% to nearly 45%. Then there were things that came along. There was a lovely IT system that we had. When I turned it on every day, we would, on an average day, have 30 more sign-ups for the campaign, or 30 more engagements with the campaign in some shape or fashion. I knew I'd had a good day if it was 50 or 60. My best day is probably an event that people can't quite understand. I turned on the computer and I had 2,700 followers. The event of that day was Tony Benn and John Major speaking at McGee University. The next day I turned on my computer, it had jumped by 350. That event had not delivered what they had expected. What was said and what was heard was fundamentally different, and it seriously changed the campaign. I had promised London that I could get from 30 to 40%. I seriously believe the difference of between 40 to 44 was delivered by the McGee event and was delivered by my opposing campaign. Now, this is a little flag that was taken by Northern Ireland fans for the Germany game just before the referendum. One of my canvassers said, I've got a special flag made. You have to promise me you'll put it on the Vote Leave website if I do canvassing for you. I promised, and I kept my promise. It appeared about 5 o'clock the evening before the referendum. Within a number of hours, it had 4,000 shares, 40,000 likes, and 400,000 views. In a small place like Northern Ireland, that was telling you something is happening out in the undergrowth. The next day, I was standing in D Street, having just had a conversation with two women in their late 30s, married with kids, who had never voted in their entire life before, and we had to explain the process of voting because they wanted to go and vote leave. As I was standing there, I was getting the turnout, and the turnout from a local polling station arrived, and it was 48% at 5 p.m. It hadn't been 48% at the 9 p.m. for the Assembly election about a month earlier. People were coming out to vote. That is the moment I was convinced Leave was going to win, because if those people of that profile were coming out to vote in Northern Ireland, the same would be happening in GB. If that was happening in GB, Leave was going to win. So the sub-data was important. I then started digging into a 2019 poll by the University of Liverpool. Poor John Tong was traumatized by the number of additional sets of data I was asking him for, and can you get me this subgroup of that subgroup and all the rest of it, because I wanted to really find where are the diamonds, where in the sub-data is this polling. So what did the University of Liverpool, and then after that I got the chance to do private polling. Well, it became through loud and clear that it was a Northern Ireland of 3 tribes and 2 conversations. Northern Ireland has changed politically, socially, and economically. There is a significant number of people who are still having the old conversation, unionist or nationalist, will Northern Ireland be abolished? Will Northern Ireland leave the UK, or will it stay? Then there was also a bunch of people who weren't participating in that. A union flag, a tricolour, did not interest them. They had taken a step away from our politics, seeing every election as a referendum. They do not see an election as a referendum. Now, there can be then a debate in unionism where it talks about, you'll hear sometimes the terms cultural unionism and civic unionism, where lots of people will go, oh, civic unionism is the future, we have to forget all about this cultural unionism stuff. Well, the challenge I have for those is the data shows power to identity. People who are British or unionist are more likely to vote. So there is a value, a political impact from that. Now, both of those have issues. Britishness has an age problem, declines with age, and unionism has a class problem. The wealthier you are, the less likely you are to call yourself explicitly a unionist. You will hear different markers of British, Irish, Northern Irish, unionist, nationalist, other, and Protestant, Catholic, and none. And it can be easy to assume that all those little names mean exactly the same thing. There's a fluidity there that needs recognised. So the 2 main third tribes are people who call themselves Northern Irish and neithers. So what are the differences around them? Northern Ireland identifiers are more pro-UK when it comes to the referendum question than neithers. And also on different political issues, they hold different political views. So they're not mirror images of each other. People who say they're Northern Irish tend to be younger, and it's stronger outside Belfast. Those who say they're neithers, very interestingly, had the same distribution as Irish nationalism. Essentially, what seems to be the subtext of it is there are a bunch of people who became more relaxed and taken a half step away from Britishness and unionism, and they've put themselves in the Northern Irish space. And that gets a lot of attention. But this would also seem to indicate that equally there's a bunch of people from a Catholic nationalist Republican background have taken a step away, half step away from it as well. They will still see themselves as Irish, but they're no longer defining themselves as nationalist in their politics. Even with the Northern Ireland identifier, you could find 3 subgroups. Those who were I'm Northern Irish, they've grown up in this politics of Northern Ireland, a new assembly. That's now their sort of strong identifier. But they tend to be younger and unpoliticised, but they're pro-UK. Then you have a bunch of people who pick it because they see it as the safe one, the neutral one. British and Irish are picking a side. They don't like picking sides, so they'll go for the one in the middle. And believe it or not, there's also a significant section of the Catholic working class like it as their chosen name of identity. What do they have in common? Well, what they actually have in common is they're both less politicised to political questions. There's a lot more don't knows. Unsurprisingly, if you're less politicised, you're less likely to vote. The one thing that they agreed on entirely to a percentage point was their attitude to religion. They have no interest in it. And interestingly, and it's not something that you pick up from the public discourse, when I was going through the numbers for the DUP, I was producing a lot of problems. There was, it was the people who aren't voting for us really don't like us, and a chunk of the people who were voting for us weren't far behind them, but were still voting for us. But the one saving grace whenever I was going through the numbers was they didn't really like, they disliked Sinn Féin even more. So they're not natural allies. They very much see them as associated with the past. And this new generation and this new group want nothing to do with the violent past in any shape, form, or fashion. So what are their attitudes and values? Well, there's a change factor going on. It's a natural outworking of peace and working devolution. It was energized by the collapse of Stormont. It did become a political factor in that. There's also some of this is the tensions which are developing in every Western democracy between the overclass and the working class. In terms of attitudes, they are more pro-devolution and pro-power sharing than the average unionist, but less so than the average nationalist. They're almost exactly in the middle. They are cold on the constitutional debate. It doesn't interest them. They're generally more socially liberal. The big question for them is, what sort of Northern Ireland am I going to be living in? And they feel an attachment to that Northern Ireland and they want to see it succeed. When I grew up, even if you disagreed with what the community or tribal or communal view was, you were expected to stay in line. It was bad form to go wandering off. Well, I actually agree with these other ones on that. That wasn't to be allowed. Now they see no problem in an issue by issue alliance. I agree with that party on that one issue. That's it. I'm not buying into any of the rest of the stuff. So they've no problems with that. In terms of all the different identities around the sort of pro-UK, pro-Northern Ireland community, they're not really disinterested in it. And unsurprisingly, for a new generation of the last 30 years, they're very socially media driven. So in terms of a referendum and the third tribe, well, the good news for those who are pro-UK, pro-Northern Ireland, the referendum situation there, the score there is very good. The political challenge is, why can the pro-UK, pro-Northern Ireland position hit 60%, but those who advocate it for politically are voting between 40 to 43? So referendum unionism is doing fine. Political unionism obviously has a problem that it needs to solve. For every 2 votes it's getting, on paper, there's another one out there that they could be getting that they're so far not in the market for. So unionism would win a referendum. I'm very confident in that. On a good day, I would say we'd win 2-1. On an average day, it'd be 3-2. On a bad day, we'd probably win 55-45 if one was called. Now, even within that, there's also a section of what I would describe as not yetters. They see themselves as culturally Irish. If you ask them their politics, they would tell you they're a nationalist. But where it gets very interesting is probably about 1 in 10 of them. If you ask them, do you believe in United Ireland in 20 years' time? Yes, I do. Would you vote for it tomorrow? No, I wouldn't. So it is all part of their identity, but in a real world situation, they take a step back. Now, if you ask those same people that question 20 years before, you'd have still got the same answer. So 20 years ago, they would have predicted they would vote for it today, but whenever they're asked the question today, they're still going, oh no, it's another 20 years. So there's a pool of votes there. Now, the risk in all this is you have lots of people there who are under-politicized. Voting is a habit. Are they even registered? There's a bunch of don't knows out there for people to convince to either side of the case. And then you're into things about resources. Nationalism is better resourced. Now, I wanted to know more, and John Tong wasn't doing any surveys that I could piggyback on or steal. So I went off and raised some money to do private polling in Northern Ireland using a top company from London. 2 polls, 1,500 people, first in April 2021, then in September. April targeted local government voters because they're your core of your core. They're going to be voting even if their arm's fallen off. So that's your foundation. Then September was Westminster voters. They're the people who turn up for the big event but don't turn up for the Assembly or Council elections. So I wanted to know where both were at. In both, the pro-UK, pro-Northern Ireland position was doing well, winning in both cases. Then I was able to break down the voters, and There was hard unionists, hard nationalists, and basically the way it worked was, so those are your foundation. The people who will vote, they know how they're voting before there's a poster on a lamppost or a leaflet through the door. And they're not going to be convinced by any other leaflet that comes through a door. So those were the two cores, and hard unionism was bigger than hard nationalism. So the pro-UK position had a stronger foundation. Then you had two key groups, centrists and disengaged. So who are they? Gender doesn't impact on it. Age doesn't impact it. Religion, it was roughly 40% Protestant, 40% Catholic, 20% no religion. Socioeconomic ABC ones, they were middle class and up. University degree, nearly 60% had a university degree. In terms of identity, 52% opted for Northern Irish. Voting Alliance, 63% of them. But in a referendum, they were 60% stay, 31% leave, 10% don't know. Who are the disengaged? Well, what it showed was it was actually predominantly female. They were the most disengaged from politics. Age didn't make much of a difference. Religiously, it was split three ways, Protestant, Catholic, and none. Socioeconomic, it was very strongly working class. That's also reflected in it. 76% did not have a university degree. But one big thing that they shared with those who see themselves as centrists was their preferred identity, Northern Irish. In terms of voting, 37% were on the line, undecided, or didn't vote. Where would they be in a referendum? 50% were for stay, 6% were for leave, and 44% were don't know. Now, all these different peoples, all these different backgrounds, all these religions and nones, politics and no politics, etc. Is there ways of communicating with all those people and doing it successfully? So tested some messages. Does everybody want Northern Ireland to be better for the next generation? Everybody loved that. Then there was more focused questions. Do you consider a referendum a distraction? A clear majority considered it a distraction. And there was a strong consensus there between hard unionists and centrists, and also a majority of the disengaged. Then, if you ask them the question, is uniting Northern Ireland more important than uniting Ireland? Again, it had a good majority. Again, you had a strong consensus between hard unionists and centrists, a majority of the disengaged. But two important figures there were among hard Republicans, hard nationalists. 46% were going, yeah, a referendum right now is a bit of a distraction. And also 35% said uniting Northern Ireland is more important. That tells me that whatever the front facade, there are problems in nationalism's backyard aren't really part of the public discourse. Now, there was external validation of this stuff. There were two more polls. There was one by the University of Liverpool into neithers, and then the 2024 Westminster poll. So we'd got the previous academic polling, I'd got the private polling, and then there was two other bigger polls that came along, and it was essentially going, we were on the right track. Now, what does this all fundamentally mean? Well, what it actually means is don't believe the hype, and hype is what a lot of it is. There is not significant substance behind it. What you're having is a monologue about a hypothetical that you can't disprove, but there is no substance to it. There is no fitting push behind it. What they've essentially the mind game or psyop they're trying to play is Northern Ireland has changed politically, socially, economically, and culturally. All those things are absolutely true. But they're taking this new society, this new square peg, and trying it to force it into an old round hole. Northern Ireland is in a new and different place. Its politics have changed, and how people respond to that needs to change. From finding and digging into the subdata, from finding these diamonds, Northern Ireland's future has not been written yet, but the people actually with the pen and paper in front of them to write its future are much more those who hold the pro-UK, pro-Northern Ireland position than those who want to abolish Northern Ireland. Thank you very much.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Wrong way. There we go. Okay. Gia Eve. I noticed nobody replied. That must prove only Ulster Protestants now speak Irish. Thank you very much. You'll have to leave now. So I want to start off with something which is quite negative, but I want to to present to the Senate Committee on Constitutional Future of Ireland. Okay. When the report came out, which was fine, it called for planning and preparation, etc., we were rendered invisible. Any parliamentary committee that I have spoken to may well come up with a conclusion, but it actually it includes all of the voices that were part of that conversation. We were rendered invisible. And what happened? There was lots of social media that came out. Unionists came to the Senate. Unionists came to the Senate. Unionists came to the Senate. It was a box-ticking exercise. If we're going to have this conversation, you can't render people invisible. What you also have to understand is that that process was the complete antithesis of the type of civic space in which we engage. Let's remember, and I'm going to mention this several times in this talk, as somebody, unlike Lee, who campaigned for the Good Friday Agreement, primary motivation for me to support the Good Friday Agreement was parity of esteem and mutual respect. I was fed up with the sectarianization of the society in which I lived. Okay. Now, this event was so bad that, as you can see in this photograph, me, Colin, and all the tall people were decapitated. So let's talk about how this can be done through parity of esteem and mutual respect. So I just captured this of a project we run. Lucy here is now working on the second iteration of that. So we run a project at Liverpool called Civic Space. All perspectives are treated equally and represented equally. It cannot be beyond our imagination to have this debate and to have this conversation in which we constantly reproduce parity of esteem and mutual respect. We have to find ways to further democracy and consent and a voice and opinion into the public square. Too much of the debate is noise, too much of the debate is sectarian, and too much of the debate has moved away from the very principles of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, if you render people and their facts and their beliefs and their opinions, okay, if you render those people invisible, that's an act of symbolic violence. That's an act in which you're reproducing the power dynamics, you're reproducing the cultural norms, and you're reproducing the practices which actually defy a capacity to have a mature, robust conversation. So I don't want to render somebody in Derry invisible. I don't want to render somebody in Dundalk invisible. I want to be part of an inclusive process of conversation with those people. I'm not saying we walk out of the room and we change our ideological beliefs, but the whole principle of conflict transformation is that you don't have to change your ideological commitments. You change the way in which you practice them. And I think a partnership between us and this organization and others would be critical to having proper debates that are respectful. Now, what you'll hear is demography is destiny. And what you will have seen is this, which is since 2001, the blue line, the Catholic population is now bigger than the Protestant population. We all know this, yes? Did you hear in that debate anything about the lines at the bottom? The people who don't state their religion and the people who are of other faiths? Because people of no faith are actually growing. Now, if you're into sectarian head counting, then you don't just count 2 heads when there are 4. You have to count all of the heads. So let's look at this as a claim that those people who said they were not religious were culturally Catholic. So in the last census, Catholic population grew by 0.6%. Protestant population constantly, slightly smaller decline, but it was a decline nonetheless. So in our little up there place, when you answer this, when you get the census, it asks you 2 questions. The first question is, what is your religion? So I don't answer that question. The next question is, what religion were you brought up in? Okay. In the first question, roughly 20% of people say, I have no religion. Half of those people then say, basically, they're Protestants. Okay. That leaves you 10%, which, and you saw in the first graph, the two populations are the same size. That 10% is really important, not only because it's 10%, which is a large share, but also because it's growing. This, on the left-hand side of that graph, that's the population by identity. Okay. So around about 36% of people in our census said they were Irish. When you go to the 10% who say they are non-religious, the Irish share drops. And what rises is British and Northern Irish. Okay? So some of you heard nationalists going, I would talk about those people when it suits them. But the point is, this is a type of rigor we have to have. We have to look at what's happening sociologically in a society and what impacts that is having. Now, I can't tell you those people how they would vote in a border poll, but I can tell you whenever we look at them through our projects, that if you call yourself British, you're 90% certain to vote to stay in the UK. And if you call yourself Northern Irish, you're 80% certain to stay in the UK. And if you go beyond the two main faiths, if you go over to the people who say they have no religion, that comes out again at 70%. Okay? So there is a big cultural shift that has taken place in Northern Irish society, in that some Protestants have moved away from the idea of a faith definition, but they have not shifted their belief in the union. And that's the type of complexity that Lee was referring to earlier. Now, you'll also hear that the Protestant population is aging. Okay? So you can see here the orange line, 65-year-olds on this side, and the younger generation at the far end. So the orange line is the Protestant community. It's aging, it's declining, etc. Look at the blue line. Between in 2021, population distribution. The blue line is effectively a bell curve. Both populations are declining. Okay? So you have the actual number of people, Catholic Protestant, declining. It's declining at the younger age groups, and they're declining together. So that decline that the Protestant community experienced 20 years ago is now the same in the Catholic population. Look at the yellow line. When you get into the younger age groups, it's growing. So you get the point about not treating people as invisible. They have opinions, they have politics, they have beliefs, and they are increasingly growing. So if you look at this graph here, the blue graph, in 1970, 5 years after I was born, I know I look younger, there were about 30,000 children born in Northern Ireland. Last year, it was 19,000. So you see this story about demography as destiny? It just doesn't have the same volume that it once had. The little orange line below is children who are born to mothers who are not from Britain, UK or Ireland. Last year, 10% of those people were migrants, children. If we look over here, between 1991 and 2021, Northern Ireland is obviously bringing in more people from beyond these islands. So here's another group of people who we render invisible, who are going to be part of any constitutional future of Northern Ireland. What we're also told is the younger people are pro-United Ireland. Okay, so we do all these surveys. And of course, if you look at that, if you go to the 18 to 24-year-olds, you're getting close to 50% of young people in that age group who are saying they want a United Ireland. So that is a shift. More young people are supportive of the idea of United Ireland. First of all, when I went to school, a majority was over 50. There is no survey which shows the majority of young people want a United Ireland. Okay? You will see a growth in the desire, but it is not a majority. Now, the little orange bars are the respective electorate weights of those age groups. So you may well have more young people who are saying they want a United Ireland, but their electoral weight is declining. You see the point I'm making? We went back to that previous graph. Our population is largely 25 to 60. What's coming up behind it is much, much smaller. So demography may well be destiny, but demography would only be destiny if people who call themselves Protestants or non-religious were to then say, I want a United Ireland. It's not as obvious as we were told. So you can see this more clearly. The last census, the first two blocks, 0 to 14, 15 to 39. They're both 14 year bands, yeah? Okay. We can compare them directly. A third of the Catholic population is aged 15 to 39. 20% of the Catholic population is aged 0 to 14. Okay. And yet again, if we look at that as a respective share of the population, it is declining. So what we have is a declining birth rate. And in our primary schools, which are state Protestant primary schools, 35% of children last year in state primary schools in Northern Ireland were no religion. So we're looking at something which is not the 100-year-old boring, repetitive conversation. We're looking at a society which is changing. What we're also told is the neithers are abandoning the union. These people called neithers. Okay. So this is an interesting point about the media. John Tong, my colleague John Tong, who wants United Ireland, so he's not coming to the Christmas party. My colleague John Tong did this survey, 5,000. It's the biggest survey ever done in Northern Ireland. It received virtually no media attention. It received no media attention because he looked at what is the largest section of the electorate, the neithers. The largest section of our electorate are people who say they are not unionist or nationalist. Why would I turn on the radio? Why would I turn on the TV? Why would I lift up a newspaper? Are we constantly talking about unionists and nationalists and leaving out 40% of the electorate? That's obscene. That's a complete failure of the media to actually engage in the knowledge and the facts about the society upon which they are reporting. So when you look at the neithers, not only are they 40% of the electorate, you'll see here for those of you at the back, the purple is pro-union and the red is pro-unity. The neithers are effectively a mixture of DNA Protestants who don't like the identity labels, or they're nationalists who want to stay within the UK. So the biggest section of our electorate, the growing section of our electorate, are firmly, as shown by John Tong, to be pro-union. They're not going to go out in the 12th. They're not going to have little mugs and plates of King Charles in the house like my parents did, etc. They're going to support marriage equality. They're going to support bodily autonomy. We're allowed to change. Northern Ireland is not a fossilised place. If it is a fossilised place, then what was the point of the Good Friday Agreement? I actually met somebody the other day, and he said to me, I met the other guy who still agrees in the Good Friday Agreement like you. Right, so shoddy misrepresentations, cultural laziness, going back to this idea about symbolic power and all of that. Cultural norming and symbolic violence. Okay, let's look at this guy on the right who stood outside Casement Park in a Celtic jersey and told the world he didn't want foreign games played at Casement Park. Okay? So 60% of people in Ireland say that guy, agree with that guy. They want the United Ireland. Does that guy represent that constituency? Clearly not. Why, when I did a search yesterday in Google and put in Ulster Protestant and married that to the media in the South, then everything that come up about Ulster Protestants say they're angry, they're declining, they're traditional, etc. If you wouldn't accept him as a representation of Kathleen the Houlihan, then I'm sorry, that's not a representation of me, Alison, and Colin here today. The representation of some people are here today. It's not representation of all. We have to end this cultural sloppiness and this shorthand for what communities and people are. It has to stop. So let's just go back and look at the community that I'm part of, which has a lovely name, Remain in the UK Community. Okay? Because it's not just Protestant. It's not just Unionist. It's actually a range of people who have different reasons why they would remain in the UK. More likely to support bodily autonomy, the right of women to control their bodies. More likely, compared to those who want the United Ireland, more likely to support, or just as likely to support marriage equality. More likely to not care if somebody marries across the sectarian divide. More likely to support integrated education. More likely to not vote or vote non-constitutionally. And also more likely to be affluent. They are a community who identify in diverse ways. Okay? So I see myself as being culturally Irish as well as being culturally British and other things. I was in the Hugh Lane Gallery a few years ago, and some Republicans, I met them in there, and they said, I'm surprised the likes of you is here. Now, I didn't know, was that because I was working class and I wouldn't be in an art gallery? Or was it because I was in the South? Why wouldn't I be in the South? Why wouldn't I engage with the South? So if this is what that community is, and if we evidence this every time in every survey, this comes out over and over again. When are people in this part of the island going to start talking about that community by what they really are? It's critically important, because if you have a conversation and somebody tells you who you are and that's not who you are, you just shut down. You don't want to be part of that conversation. A place for economic realities and change. Things have changed since 1998. You know, you have a situation between 84 and now, massive growth in employment in Northern Ireland, massive growth and a decline in unemployment. Still a problem with economic inactivity in Northern Ireland. But you hear what I say there as somebody who wants to stay in the union? I'm able to say there's a big growth in employment, big growth in unemployment, but there's also a problem. I'm not denying that there aren't realities and complexities that we have to deal with. Why has that happened? Attraction of law firms, attraction of Northern Ireland's a world leader in cybersecurity, Northern Ireland's a world leader in fintech. Northern Ireland has built an economy out of the ashes of the conflict, which was built by nationalists, Republicans, unionists, and others. The Good Friday Agreement built this new economy, which is expanding and growing and increasingly professional, increasingly output-driven, and raising productivity and also wages. Wages in Northern Ireland have grown by 56% in the last 20 years, which is the highest wage growth across the UK. Why the basket case constantly being said about the place when it's actually built this new economy? Well, we've also seen even in the last 3 years, because of work of the Assembly, more people are on the living wage, more deprived people are on the living wage. People are being lifted out because of this economy from low-paid work. These are all things which are evidenced in the Department of Economy literature and publications. So let's just put this in a little bit more context. Northern Ireland's unemployment rate is lower than the UK, Ireland, and the European Union. We were the place which had some of the worst unemployment rates in Europe. 80% unemployment in Ballymurphy at the time of 1998. Completely transformed labour market. We've had this wage growth, which I've talked about. Average earnings have gone up. Cost of living is, of course, a lot cheaper than here. If a young couple are going to buy a house in Northern Ireland, the average house price is 70% lower than the average house price here. These are realities and things that we need to talk about. You know, a young couple could be incredibly liberal and have no interest in sectarian identity politics, but they might say, you know something, we're both relatively well paid, and see if we lived in the South, we couldn't afford this house. Can we just get into the spectrum of why people are motivated to stay in the UK? It's not just blood and thunder. It's also, you know something, I'm happy with my life. I don't want the disruption of Brexit, another Brexit, etc. When we look at the South, Sinn Féin are telling us, so this is the thing about the messaging we get. Sinn Féin are telling us this place is the basket case. Sinn Féin are telling us about the increase in the housing crisis. Trolley Watch IE has shown this 12-fold increase in people when they go to A&E waiting on hospital beds, etc. Eurostat, this is a really expensive place to live. You know, these are all things that we should be thinking about, because the civic economic unionist, they're thinking about this. Am I okay in the North? Look at that place down south. And we do read papers and listen to things across the border. Okay. Presidential election, you know, your constant fascination with the dysfunction of the Assembly. You know, this is an election in which nearly 60% neither voted or spoiled their ballot. One of the things which we're not talking about is what's happening in both places. The decline in consensus politics, the rise of anti-globalism, the rise of anti-migrants, the anti-liberal elite rhetoric, and also stuff which is anti-austerity. We're actually having a conversation about a border poll, which is probably a never, never land, without actually working on these threats to democracy in both places. So if we have a conversation, it can't just be about one thing. Conversation can actually be about partnership. How do you challenge racism? How do you challenge anti-democratic politics, etc.? So we need to really get into the whole thing about having talking about complexities, talking about the headwinds, talking about this in a way in which the border exists, but also it doesn't exist. We are also told that Northern Ireland has no strategic value to the UK. Well, first of all, we're 3% of the population and we feed 25% of the British population. Now, either we're eating like horses, but we're actually supplying the food chain of Great Britain and other places. Instability from Russia. Russia march into Ukraine. The price of a loaf goes up. Okay? Northern Ireland is critical to the global food security of the UK. Secondly, if any of you are pure, real anorax, have you read the Safeguarding the Union Act, which the Tories did before they disappeared, never to probably come back? If you read that paper, what it makes very clear is that Northern Ireland is critical to defence hubs in the UK. There are 10 defence hubs in the UK, 6 are in Northern Ireland, missile production, etc. Okay? They're investing in that. They're not going, oh, this place is going to leave us soon and we better take that all home. This blue line is the main links to the UK, to America, undersea cables. Comes through Coleraine, didn't go to Scotland for obvious reasons, came through Coleraine, and then it goes to every international centre in the world. Okay? I'm not being disrespectful, but we know who's be able to defend that better. The Russians are poking about, they were off Cork the other week, yes? So there are reasons why Northern Ireland is strategically valuable to the UK. So just to go through this very quickly, Lee's point, the union vote last year, pro-union vote last year is yellow. The number of people who said in that survey they wanted to stay in the UK is red. Where unionism has declined is its ability to get people to vote unionist. The decline is not in the share of people who want to stay in the UK. The unity people are getting the same. The share who want unity and the share who are voting unity is largely the same. You see that very clearly. We know that. They vote Alliance, they vote Greens, all of that. Okay. Now, this is the bit that really puzzles me. When this pressure is being put on the Taoiseach to plan for a united Ireland, so the red line is 51%. The Good Friday Agreement says the likelihood of winning an election. The green line is all of the elections since 1998 for pro-unity parties. Colin has done some work which shows that this might actually be even worse for nationalism than we've assumed. It hasn't grown. It hasn't grown. It hasn't gone northward of where it was in 1998. Like, why are we listening to this and not turning around and saying, you need to get your vote up a bit? Now, that vote might be in the Alliance Party, it might be elsewhere, but we've gone through a very, very rigorous examination of data. There's a fundamental problem here in that you're having the same thing said over and over again, and very few people are stepping up and saying, but your vote hasn't gone up. You need to be moving that dial towards 50 and getting close to 50 before any border poll could be won. The paper that in the Irish Times yesterday from Colin Harvey, he never quoted any facts or figures. He just said more people are talking about it, which tends to be, I support Linfield. You know, everybody I talk to about Linfield's a Linfield fan. Right? If I go and talk to people in this room about Linfield, you'll say, would you clear way off? I don't have no interest in that. More people are talking about it who are the people I'm talking to. Seriously. We need this type of robust thing. Southern realities, of course, the red is the 60% down here who want the United Ireland. And then as you go down, well, I'm not paying taxes and I'm not going to let them pay their bagpipes and they're going to have to change the national anthem and da-da-da-da-da. Okay? If you went to people who say they're pro-union, the vast majority of them are going to tell you they're probably never going to change their mind. the softer end, maybe if the economy collapsed, etc. When we do these surveys in Northern Ireland, you get the same thing. I want the United Ireland, but I'm not paying for prescriptions. I'm not paying for taxes. I'm not paying for the hospital. I'm not paying for this. I'm not paying for that, which means two things. The majority of people who want the United Ireland are Presbyterians. They're not going to spend their own money. Or it's conditional. And this is the fundamental problem for us who wouldn't vote tomorrow for United Ireland. Could you please supply me with a plan? What will this cost? What will it mean? Let me have a look at it. That hasn't appeared. So just to conclude, we have a new sociology of Northern Ireland. We have declines in sectarianism, growth in better community relationships, decline in faith and tradition, and also identities. That doesn't mean faith and tradition isn't important, but we also have to factor in that which has been rendered invisible. We do have this new economy. We have something which is growing, more professional workers, niche sectors, growing wages, and we've gone from 1998, in which we had too few jobs, to now having too few workers. That's a phenomenal change from the dreariness of the conflict period. Anytime I think about the growing up in the conflict, my mind turns to black and white. Anytime I think about the present, my mind turns to colour. Different place. Debate, parity of esteem, I've made that point already, mutual respect, how we actually use evidence properly, get beyond this tokenism, come and talk to us at your Senate, but then we don't really want to hear what you said. We have to get beyond that. It has to be more meaningful. Southern electorate, priorities, I'd say if a government here created a plan and costed it up for United Ireland, you'd probably turn people in the South against the United Ireland, especially when people are living in this squeeze at the minute, which is that protest vote at the weekend, which is the rise of racism, etc. The subvention is not 2 billion. No, just not 2 billion. I'm sorry, I'm not even going to debate that. It's not 2 billion. Okay. The other thing is the only surveys which are conducted on this constitutional question over a series of time is one at Queen's University and the ones we do at Liverpool, which are the only ones that have used, I'm going to be very quick, which have used a consistent methodology. Okay. I'm sorry, you can't take the interpretation that has been taken from a survey of 1,000 respondents, especially a survey which has very, very poor sampling. You can't draw inferences from a sample of 1,000. 2 bus loads of drunken rugby players, 30 people. See, I didn't fall into the old gender trap of men there. You see that, Tom? I'm the new modern person. 30 drunken rugby players. I went into the myth about the stereotype of drunkenness in rugby. 30 rugby players standing in a bar, 30 people, is 3% of 1,000-person survey. Just can't draw those differences for something that's so small. So we need to have proper research, and we need to do this in a way in which ESRI produced a report. Disposable incomes are higher in the north or in the south if you exclude housing costs. Now, despite being a man who likes his food and the odd pint, etc., I think the biggest thing I ever paid in my life was a mortgage. It's the biggest thing in my disposable income that went out every month was a mortgage. You can't just say, oh, this is higher if you leave this out. That's not debate. We're not going to hoodwink anybody like that. And we have to have a university of purpose, which is proper debates, renewing this debate properly, challenging the rhetoric that we face, wherever it comes from within my group, within your group, within whatever other group, challenging that. And obviously wanting out that what is critical here is the conversation has to, first of all, be about not what divides us, but about the key thing about what has actually been achieved since the Good Friday Agreement and the critical importance of reconciliation. Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.